Hey guys. I guess I'll just get into it. I don't have a presentation, but you can just sort of listen to the words and hopefully that'll be good enough. Um, my name is Billy Draper. I'm very excited to be here at the O100 conference in Dublin. I'm from San Francisco, so I'm a little bit jet lagged. I have a script that I'm going to try to stick to remedy that. I've never been to Dublin before, so I'm also open to any food and drink recommendations afterwards. I'm also highly aware of the fact that I'm the last thing standing between you and cocktail hour, and so I will try to be concise and leave a little bit of time for questions. Um, what I was thinking about doing today was I'll introduce myself, and then I want to talk a little bit about investing inside of Silicon Valley. And then I'll talk a little bit about investing outside of Silicon Valley. And then I want to talk about trust in investing. And hopefully that will help you with your conviction or your thinking around your investment thesis or strategy. So first of all, my name is Billy Draper. As I said, I'm a general partner at Draper Associates. We are a $190 million early stage fund based in Silicon Valley. The team historically is best known for investments in companies like Skype and Baidu and Tesla, but more recently we were early investors in companies like Robinhood and Thumbtack and Cruise Automation and Twitch. Robinhood, which is a mobile-first stock brokerage account, was actually the first deal I ever led at Draper Associates. It was in early 2013, and the company is now worth, we invested at the seed stage and the company is now worth $5 billion. So I'm going to spend the next rest of my life trying to match that and likely will never be able to. I'm a fourth generation venture capitalist. My great grandfather was actually one of the first VCs in the Silicon Valley before it was called the Silicon Valley. My grandfather was a pioneer in the space. He founded a fund called Sutter Hill that's still around today, another one called Draper Richards. And then my dad, who is also my partner on Draper Associates, founded DFJ in the late 80s, now one of the premier recognized Series A and Series B venture funds in the Valley. All that to say I have big shoes to fill and it will likely take a lifetime to do so. So investing in Silicon Valley. Venture investing in Silicon Valley has an enormous amount of benefits, but it's also a bit of a double-edged sword. The success of technology and the internet over the past few decades has birthed the sort of idyllic breeding ground for entrepreneurship. We have some of the best technical and engineering universities in Stanford and Berkeley. We have the headquarters of some of the largest enterprise tech companies in Apple and Google and Facebook and Oracle. We have a high concentration of angel investors and venture capitalists and every stage of financing in between. We have a high risk tolerance and an unconventional openness to failure, which is incredibly entrepreneurially friendly. We have spectacular weather. My grandfather always credits the weather for the success of Silicon Valley, so I thought I had to mention it. In so many ways, Silicon Valley is the perfect place to start a company. But here's what I've also found to be true. When you make it so incredibly appealing to start a company with such fertile ground and ecosystem, those who otherwise wouldn't have the risk tolerance or entrepreneurship bug want to try their hand at starting something. Everyone wants to start something, and nobody wants to maintain it. In an extreme case, you could go to Stanford, come up with a problem, put together a PowerPoint, get into one of the incubators or accelerators in the area, raise $1 million seed round, and run it into the ground with little or no risk and little or no consequence. You're probably paying yourself what you would be paid elsewhere. You are in no way lowering your chances of getting a job after your company goes under. In some cases, you're actually helping your chances of getting a job afterwards because you're showing moxie and leadership skills that maybe a potential hirer would want to see. Failure has become so accepted that it has become a sort of badge of honor. They say to fail fast. This long-term, obviously, is not good for investors. It creates more noise at the top of the funnel, more difficult decisions, more sussing out which ones are true entrepreneurs solving real problems and which ones are more opportunistic. Investing outside of Silicon Valley. This is the benefit of investing outside of the area. I mentioned if you're starting a company in Silicon Valley, you're putting very little at risk. But your investors are. and thus you're often fundamentally misaligned. If you're an entrepreneur in Denver or Berlin or Dublin, you're knowingly pursuing something incredibly risky in an area without the same support system. You're free climbing. You're consciously accepting the risks, and in order to take on such an endeavor, you need to truly believe in the problem you're solving and the solution that you're developing. It's an indicator of perseverance and grit. Companies outside of the Valley are much more likely to have been bootstrapped, meaning the entrepreneur has put in his or her own capital to fund the company up to a point. And so that alignment with investors is actually much healthier. You're also more likely to have the survival instincts when things are not going well. And it sounds obvious, but so much of building a business is just staying alive through the cycles. My brother, Adam, runs an incubator in Silicon Valley. They invest in virtual reality and cryptocurrency. And he has this theory that he calls the Cockroach Theory. He tells all of his entrepreneurs, be the cockroach, be the thing that just stays alive. It's incredibly unlikely that you're going to build the right product for the right market at just the right time. And so being able to give yourself the wiggle room, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months on either end, that extra grit, being able to survive, could be the difference between what's working and what is not. Many of you are LPs and GPs in Europe and beyond, and so I wanted to make this point, and I'm sure you've all seen this in practice. You may or may not have the same quantity of deal flow in some markets versus others, but the quality at the top of the funnel could actually be much higher because of these sort of immeasurable, self-selecting, true entrepreneur indicators. So now we're going to get into a few points I want to make about trust, and hopefully this stuff will help you in your decision-making and selection criteria. My first point that I want to make is trust yourself. There was a student from Stanford Business School who wanted to intern at our fund last summer. So we set up a meeting, and he started asking if I had heard of this company or if I had met with that company, sort of proving what his value would be if he worked at Draper Associates. We got to one that I hadn't heard of, and he launched into something like this. Oh, okay, well, the CEO was at Deloitte and then went to Harvard Business School and then spent time on the product team at Google. She met up with her CTO at HBS, and he was at MIT for undergrad and then worked on the core team at Oculus and did a stint at Apple, and so on. About 5 minutes into him going on this sort of rampage, I had to stop him and say, great, what the hell does the company do? So he was explaining everything to me in the context of validators. He didn't want to stake his own reputation on the validity of this business, so he created this mountain of backing behind him with these high-value brand names. Don't get me wrong, I think it's normal to use brands as validation or checkmark for decisions. Where I take issue is relying entirely on brands as the core impetus for the decision. This person I was speaking to didn't want to say, this company does this, and I like them because he didn't want to be accountable in the case that we ended up investing. Though surely in the case that the business was successful, and he would want to reclaim the credit later on. It's like trying to buy a call option on taking credit without staking anything. So to him and to you all, I would say, trust yourself. Be willing to stand behind your opinions and decisions. Trust your judgment. It's incredibly easy to find reasons to say no to early stage companies for a myriad of reasons. It's so easy. But if you rely too much on brand validators or on the decisions or opinions of others, your judgment will become bland and your returns likely will as well. When we evaluate businesses, we first look at the market size or the potential market size. Some companies can grow a market, and then we look at the product and the progress, and then we meet with the founding team. And we have a number of criteria we look for there. And then we do the check of did they work where they said they worked? Or did they succeed like they said they succeeded? I'm not saying that's the right way or the wrong way, but if you're using brands as your sole criteria, you are effectively letting other people make your investment decisions. Other people who likely have other motivations and other criteria. Stand behind your decisions and your companies will love you for it. My second point about trust is trust one another. My first thought after that meeting was, why couldn't he trust himself? But my second was, why couldn't he trust me to believe him if he was excited about this company? Just person to person, why can't we just remove all of the constant justification and validation and talk to people? What do you think? I think it's an exciting opportunity because of X, Y, and Z. What do you think? And that got me thinking about the following. Some of the largest industries in the world are built because of a lack of trust in one another. Think of all the industries that were designed specifically to protect us from each other. Banking, the legal system, the security industry, cyber and physical, insurance. A tiny percentage of bad actors or morally misaligned people have done enough to create hundreds of billions of dollars in industries backed by fear. Now, I'm not saying throw your legal contracts out, and I'm not even saying disarm your security systems. I'm saying look for reasons to believe people versus not believe them. Look for reasons to trust people if you can. Look for the good in people, and they will often live up to it. Warren Buffett famously would do these giant deals buying businesses on a 1 or 2 page document. I'm sure that's probably evolved since then, but it seemed to work out pretty well for him in the early days. Keep this stuff in mind when you're evaluating investment opportunities. Again, it's easy to be cynical and to find reasons not to invest. My dad is one of the most optimistic investors in the world, and what he always says is, don't look so hard for reasons why something wouldn't work. Think about how big it gets if it does, and go from there. On a given investment, you have a 1x downside, you have a controlled downside, and an unlimited upside. I know that's easier said than done, but it's certainly something that I follow and something to keep in mind. And my last point about trust is trust your process. I don't know if any of you guys follow NBA basketball. It's probably unlikely, but I'm going to talk about it anyways. This is a phrase I borrowed from the Philadelphia 76ers basketball team. They spent a couple of years making unconventional moves, purposely losing games, resting injured players for long periods of time, hoarding players in one position but lacking in another position, and all the while saying, trust the process. What they were doing basically was saying, hey, we're not going to win a championship overnight or this year. This is a long-term game, and we need to be patient. What moves would we make if we weren't trying to win now, but rather we're trying to make a real run in 3 or 4 years? This year, their tactics look like they've paid off. They're entering the playoffs with a high seed and some of the best talent in the league. I think it was Jeff Bezos who said, in entrepreneurship, you need to be willing to be wrong for a long period of time before you're right. The same goes for venture capital, especially at the early stage where we play. Things take time. It's rarely an immediate curve up and to the right. Companies go through fits and starts. Companies go through ebbs and flows. And this is a piece of the talk that I like to give to entrepreneurs as well. I always like to explain that some of the most transformative businesses in the world made people incredibly uncomfortable at first. Amazon came in the mid-90s when consumer internet was brand new and scary. To many, the web felt like the black hole of untrustworthy information. You would hear horror stories about viruses and hackers. Everyone was using pseudonyms and screen names to protect their real information and identity. And then Amazon came along and said, give us your credit card information. In that world, at that time, the idea of sharing credit card information anywhere on the internet was a completely foreign concept. And this created a point of friction in Amazon's quest to onboard customers. So another Jeff Bezos reference, what Bezos did, and he wrote some of this in a letter to shareholders in the mid to late 90s, was encourage the team to focus on what they could control. Amazon had the largest selection of books. It was open 24 hours a day. They offered the best pricing. You didn't need to drive anywhere. It had a lot of advantages over your local bookstore. And after they got that first customer to trust them, hey, I used Amazon and I didn't get my credit card stolen, then they could tell their friends, and then you create this virtual cycle, and then you have a ratings platform, and it creates Amazon as we know it today. Facebook had a very similar story. It came in the early 2000s when, again, the generally accepted practice on the internet was to use screen names to protect your real identity. As Amazon did with credit cards, Facebook did with true identity. That was the first time many of us shared our true real names online. Facebook created an offering so appealing and a product so engaging that users were willing to share some of their real information in order to gain access to pictures of friends, updates from friends, and so on. It started with real name and university email address, and then it moved on to your job, your interest, and so on. The first time I rode in a Lyft or an Uber, I'll never forget. I took a cab, I took a Lyft from the San Francisco airport back to my apartment at the time in San Francisco. And I got back to my roommate. I said, oh, I just tried this new thing, Lyft, where you ride as a passenger in someone else's car. And he said, what? Was it awkward? Where did you sit? Was it, were you totally uncomfortable? Is that safe? He went on a 15-minute sort of line of questioning, and within, I'd say, 2 to 3 months after that, he was riding Lyft or Uber 2 to 3 times a week. They created an offering that was so compelling that it couldn't be ignored, and I was the person who I said, no, it's actually really great. You should try it. And so that sort of viral coefficient started to take place. Airbnb is the same. The idea of allowing strangers into your home was absurd in 2008. But then they added an insurance policy to ensure your home stays intact and standardized some criteria for owners and guests. And then they were able to offer homes in areas where hotels did not exist. And then the user reviews and the two sides of the marketplace started to balance each other out. There's a movie called Hitch starring Will Smith. This part gets way crazy. Where he plays a love expert, and he's teaching his student, Kevin James. None of you guys have seen it. Maybe some of you have seen this movie. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it. He's teaching his student how to kiss. He says the initiator of the kiss should go 90% of the way and let the other person come the last 10%. It's the same with building a product. Control the 90% you can control. Build the best offering you can possibly build. And if you do that and you trust your instincts, you need to believe that the user will take the leap and come the last 10. So be patient with your investments, trust the process, understand that this is a long-term game and the cycles aren't always predictable or logical. When you make an investment decision, anticipate the discomfort in the near term and just be ready to stand behind it for years before it starts to make sense to others. Transforming an industry takes time and it takes patience. Thank you so much for having me. So does anyone have any questions?
As a GP, how much of your investment is outside of the US?
Yeah, great question. So we invest about 25% outside of the US.
In any particular?
We're very opportunistic. So in our current fund, we have 2 investments in Southeast Asia. We have one here in Dublin, actually, a company called Pointy. And then we have, right now it's probably, of the investments that are outside of the US, most are in Europe, 1 or 2 are in Africa, and then 3 or 4 maybe scattered throughout Asia. We are part of what's called the Draper Venture Network. So we are a node in a network. Our fund is $190 million, but we are a part of sort of like the Star Alliance of venture capital. So we have a partner fund. We have 14, I believe, partner funds throughout the world. And so when we're looking at a deal outside of who are we to know about the sort of cultural differences in Southeast Asia, but we have a fund there that we connect with and we say, hey, would this product make sense over there? It would make a lot of sense in the US, so maybe it'll work over there as well. And they go and they tell, give us a little bit more of the context. So that's, I guess we don't have, our investment team is 5 people, so we don't have our office anywhere but Silicon Valley, but we have trusted partners elsewhere. Yeah, so that's what, and I'm learning this as I go, but what I'm expecting is 7 to 12 years. And in a 10-year fund, it's sort of like we're just hoping we stick the landing at the right time. But if you look at companies like Dropbox, it seems relatively new, but it was around for 11 years. Uber, by the time it goes public, will have been around for 10 plus years. So for these things to really get transformative, it typically takes a long time. The lemons die early. So the companies go out of business quickly, but then the ones that stick around take a long time to cultivate. So things I'm really excited about are, I really like marketplaces in general. I know that's very broad, but I like people-powered marketplaces. So with a worker on one end and a customer on the other end. So Uber is a perfect example of that. We're investors in a company called Law Trades that does it for lawyers. Again, it makes people a little bit uncomfortable to sort of go to this brand for their legal help. But the idea of, I feel like there's total misalignment in the legal industry. They get paid to take longer. It's like, that's the opposite of what I want. So I think there are a lot of industries where the marketplaceization of the world has not yet taken place, and it'll be a lot of B2B or SMB companies for a while. And then a lot of what we do is financial technology, so I think there's a lot of disruption there. Our jobs, right, venture capital, private equity, hedge fund managers, all of that is going to change as the end user gets more control of their own finance. That's what Robinhood does. It helps with that. Oh, he's saying that I said to focus on the upside versus the downside, which is very limited.
Yeah, and is there an example of that where an investment that's just not gone as you would expect, and do you think you could have avoided it?
Yeah, most. I think what we work on, so we work at the early stage. We invest in companies that are valued between, in some cases, $2 million valuation to $12 million valuation is where we sort of enter. And so the expectation for us is we would just knock this cover off the ball if a third of those end up being big businesses. So we expect a certain percentage of those to disappear, but we just know the reason that the math works is because we know that the ones we're betting on, or hopefully will continue to work, is that we know the ones that we're betting on have the potential to be huge. So even if 1 out of 5 of them actually ends up being what we hope or close to what we hope, it makes up for the 3 or 4 that we sort of also had hopes for. But yes, we've seen it go both ways. I think, yeah, in most cases it goes the other way. It goes to 0, or it sort of flutters around, goes to 2x or 3x or whatever. But then there's the case every once in a while where it goes to, whatever, hundreds of times.
The stereotype of the startup in the US is the Silicon Valley young founder. Does that match the types of companies you invest in terms of age on geography, or do you now invest more outside of the Valley, even within the US? And particularly like the classics are Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston, but do you see other geographies emerging within the US?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question first. So in the US, yeah, definitely. I think there are a lot of exciting things going on in Seattle and Portland and Austin, Texas, and Denver, Colorado. It's getting less appealing to live in California, just generally. And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs are seeing, hey, we have the same amount of information, we can get cheaper engineers if we just move literally anywhere except for here in New York City. And so they're going to Chicago, Boston, as you said, but they come from everywhere. That's the exciting thing. I'll take as many meetings as I take calls, and I think a company can succeed from anywhere. And your question about age, we see it's a combination. I'd say for the most part, it totally depends. There are some companies where it's a second or third time founder. There's some companies where it's someone just out of college. We prefer that they have some experience in the workforce. I feel like that is a good indicator of how successful companies work. When they come and say, oh, I'm a serial entrepreneur, that's sort of a concern. Like, why have you started 6 businesses? What happened to them? That's sort of the opposite of what we look for. We look for someone who's, why are you, and my dad always pries, and he says, so why are you doing this? he challenges them, and then if they start backing off, then it's not a good sign. But if they say, we're doing this because we worked on, I worked at this company and they were doing it wrong and they refused to listen to me, and now I started this new solution and I've sold it to 6 customers and I think it could really work. And if they rise to that occasion versus backing off of that occasion, and sometimes having some confidence in the workforce helps with that. But it's a total, it's all, I'd say, all over the map.
What's the fourth generation Draper plans in a discussion on ICOs?
Yeah. Oh man, my mom hates it, but it's so. I'm very excited about blockchain technology in general, and I think if my dad were up here or my brother were up here, they would probably talk. This would all be about ICOs. I feel like the technology is very exciting. What I'm more excited for is the applications that are built on top of it. So I think ICOs, we'll see how it all shakes out. I think there will be a few that sort of rise to the top, but people need to be able to touch and feel and use things before they can generate enormous value. But I'm excited. I'm very excited about sort of this idea of the decentralization of currency. And again, like I said, our business, venture capital, is changing. There was a quarter last year where I think more money was raised on ICOs than was raised in venture capital, or in early stage venture capital. Whatever the statistic was, it's like, oh, that's a direct threat to us because they did that without. They didn't have to go to Sand Hill. They didn't have to come, to San Francisco. They could do that from anywhere. So I think it's really exciting. It's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur. And that's another thing that's sort of scary for us is we just have to be so selective of all these people starting businesses.
You have a pretty unique perspective on the venture industry given the 4 generations. So I guess sort of in addition to that conversation around the dinner table, how do you think the venture industry has changed since your sort of grandfather's time to your time? And then as we think about, 5th, 6th generation Draper family, what's the venture industry going to look like for them?
I just hope they have a world to live in. So this is funny, and I'm sure these stories get exaggerated as time goes on. But my grandfather, who I'd never met my great grandfather, but my grandfather talks about when he came out west, he would literally drive around, and he and his partner would look for signs that said technology, anything technology, and then they would go inside and say, "Oh, what are you doing? And oh, what do you guys do?" It was very much a sales business and a people business. It still is, but I think the other thing is the margins have just changed significantly. I think he mentioned that in the early days, the deal was always 50-50. Oh yeah, we'll buy half of your business. It's not that way anymore. So I think, and then with my dad, it was all about the internet. I think that was, obviously in the late 80s, early 90s, that was sort of the big wave. Now, we'll see what the wave is. It could be blockchain, it could be ICOs, but we're going to need another big wave to continue to make venture capital make sense. But anyway, it was very different. He's like, yeah, driving around in the orange groves, and every once in a while we'd stop by and say hello anytime it said technology, and then we would go, oh, it seems like a pretty good person, yeah. So it's changed, and the competition has changed too. There's a lot more money in venture capital now.
Hi, buddy. My name is Sam. What is perhaps a mistake? Sorry. Are there any mistakes that perhaps you have made or someone in your family has made that you think is something that you keep close to your heart that that you could share with us that could make us a bit smarter about certain things?
I have a higher than normal tolerance for risk. So I think my dad probably has the highest. My brother has a very high tolerance for risk as well. So I think mistakes are sort of, if you look at everything with the perspective that I talked a little bit about, with just the winners are going to make up for a few that I'm trying to think if there were any where I felt like on the edge, like a company where I felt like, I'm sure there have been a few of those where it was a company that I was excited about, and I sort of was excited about something, whether it was the team, whether it was the business itself, whether it was the product, whether it was the traction, and I sort of over-corrected for that, and then like let some other things go by the wayside, like, oh, the team, you know, oh, was that one of the things we look for in a team is, would we want to work at this business? Would we want to work for these people? And you know, there might be cases where we're so excited about the business that you sort of lose sight of like, the people were good, but I'm not sure we would necessarily work for them. Exactly. The checkboxes were checked, but they weren't extraordinary. And so those are the ones I regret. There are none, thankfully. I've been in venture for 5 years, so it's hard to say. But there are none where I feel like, whoa, I blew it. You know, oh, that was an obvious thing I should have seen.
What about the opposite? Have you ever had like a bunch of people told you no, but you got told you yes, and you wanted to do that, and stuff like that?
Yes, those ones are probably still in play. I think the told me no, yes. Usually, so in those cases, as I said, my dad is my partner, and he makes the final decision on the fund. And so usually, if he says no, we don't end up doing the deal. There are those that I'm sort of tracking that he said no, but I just want to make sure that we don't miss something. So that would sort of erase the possibility of that happening. But there are a few where I think he's crazy. So he'll, you know, oh, let's go do this flying car company, or, you know, we got to back this, you know, it's like literally we're in multiple flying car companies. And I'm just sort of thinking like, okay, yeah. But he's thinking everything is with a 10-year scope. So he's not thinking about what are we looking for tomorrow, or he's already looking why do we need self-driving cars? We're going to be flying, you know. And I think looking like I said earlier, things take 10 or 15 years. It's not crazy to think that we're going to have some version of a flying car in 10 years. And so then those sort of become popular and become, you know, funded after us and all this stuff. And then I'm sort of like, oh, no, maybe this is might be a thing. So he gets me a little bit outside of my box, which is helpful. Great.
I guess we can move on to cocktails.
All right, cocktails.